If you want to know how to read a research paper, then you have clicked the right video. I am Dr. Wasim Sheikh and I will tell you exactly how to read a scientific research paper effectively. Before starting the video, let me warn you. There are many videos you will find on the internet that will tell you how to read a paper in 10 minutes video. But this video is different than those videos. Reading a research paper is an art. You cannot master an art in 10 minutes. So this video is longer than 10 minutes. And even if you watch this video, there is no guarantee that you can precisely read the paper unless you implement all these ideas which I talk about today. So what type of papers are we discussing? So we are discussing research paper. We are not discussing any textbook chapters or opinion pieces. We are exactly talking about scientific research papers. So this is how a research paper looks like. So it has a lot of different things on the first page itself. So it can be quite confusing, but let me tell you that once you know exactly what is there on the first page of the research paper, it becomes like a breeze for you to read the research paper and exactly select what type of research paper you want for your research of literature. So here in this paper, first of all we will see the name of the journal. Here this is my paper from a journal called as Lubrication Science. Then after that you see the title of the paper. So this is the title of the paper. Then below that you will see the name of the authors. And below that you will see the affiliation of the authors. Then you see the abstract. So different papers have different types of abstract and the limitation of words are also different depending on the journal. So right now, as of now, I will just give you a small brief introduction of all these headings which are there in the paper. We can talk about them in detail in a separate video. Then at the bottom you will see the keywords. So different keywords are there. So when you type any keyword in a search engine, it matches with the keyword of these particular keywords of the research paper and then it gives the results to you. So these are the keywords. So when we write a paper, it is very important to appropriately select the keywords. Then if we scroll down below, there is an introduction section. So this is a typical research paper, an overlook of the research paper which you can see. And all these things, most of this information which I gave you is there on the first page itself. Then below that there is a section for corresponding author. So this is the author which is in contact with the journal when the journal is like a manuscript and then we submit it for consideration in any particular journal. So the editor of the journal, they are in contact with the corresponding author. So they don't reply to any other author, they only reply to the corresponding author. So we are talking about research paper and engineering and scientific research paper. Also we are talking about research papers which are in peer reviewed journals. So peer reviewed means, by default you can say that these papers are of a good quality. They have been reviewed by people who are authorities in this field. So that becomes a very important point. When you take any paper for your literature review, you have to take papers which are published in very good journals and also which are peer reviewed, because nowadays there are a lot of journals which are available. You just have to pay some amount of money and the papers are published, and these are not peer reviewed. These are just fancy journals. The big names are there, but the quality of the journal is not good. Once it gives a stamp that it is peer reviewed and it is free journal, you can be rest assured that this journal is pretty good. And today we are only dealing with such type of papers which are peer reviewed. So now let us see, there are some assumptions which we have to take into consideration where we are talking about reading a research paper. So let us see what are these assumptions. So the first assumption or a prerequisite to reading a research paper is that you are somewhat familiar with the broad idea of the research paper which you are going to read. So that is the most important point here. And if you are not familiar, so what can be done? So let us see what can be done if you are not familiar with the research paper. Because before you start reading a research paper, if you don't have any idea about the research paper, it becomes very difficult for you, because there are different jargons, there are different terms which, when you come across these terms, it becomes very difficult. So there has to be a prerequisite. You should know something about the research paper. You should have some broad idea about this research paper. So let us see what can be done. You need to read textbook, or you need to have some fundamental concepts about these topics. Only when you read textbook, you might have some broader idea of such topics. So reading a textbook to just get the fundamental idea, and then you can go to the research paper. Because research paper, a lot of information is cramped in a research paper. Most of the research paper, there are limits to the research paper. So you cannot have the fundamental concepts, you cannot have lot of detailed information. You are only talking about certain areas and issues which you want to tell to the general audience. So only that information you are putting in a research paper. So that is why the broader idea about the concept and the text is not there. So you need to have some prerequisite or background, and textbooks are a good place to start off. Then you can go through tutorials. So nowadays, like this tutorial, lot of tutorials are available online, and you can go and look up on NPTEL, you can go and look up on YouTube. Lot of video information is there. So that is also a good starting point for you to be familiar with the area of research work which you want to go in. Then you can read some papers. For example, you can read some survey papers, you can read some review papers. So also this information you will get from the journal only. So this is the starting point from where you can start for knowing a broader area where you want to work. So now let us see what is the approach to reading a research paper. There is a specific way, and I have compiled some stages which you can go through to read the research paper. So let us see what are these stages. So that is the basic approach or the strategy which we want to see. So stage 1 is, you should get the feel of the paper. So that technical term is called as skimming. That is stage 1. Stage 2 is, you should get the big picture. So if you go to stage 2, you get the big picture or a broader area or a broader picture of the entire research paper. Then stage 3 is you get the details, you get the minute details. Stage 4 is where you evaluate all these details. You can evaluate the paper. And finally, you have to synthesize the details and synthesize the paper. So these are stage 1 to stage 5. So depending on your area, depending on your interest, depending on what you want from the paper, you can either go to stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, or you can go to stage 5. But you cannot directly jump on to stage 5. You have to go from stage 1, stage 2 to stage 5, like that. So now let us see what we should do in stage 1, what we should do in stage 2, and so on and so forth, so that we have basic idea about the research paper, how to read that paper, how to go from this stage to that stage, and then basically get to know the research paper. See, the main idea for most of us to read a research paper is basically when we are doing a literature survey, and we want to see what people are doing in that area which we want to work. So mainly we want to find out the gap, mainly we want to deal with the gap. If there is any gap, how we can contribute to that area. That is the first thing which we want from the literature review. Then also, suppose you have finalized the area, you know that this is my area. So my area is minimum quantity lubrication. So I know this is my area, so I know the broader details of this topic. Then what I do is I search from very specific perspective from which I want, and then I search in that area, and then I say whether I should skim through the paper, or whether I should go to stage 5, whether I should go to stage 3, and so on. So the main thing is here, we want to know, we want to read the research paper so that it helps us to find out the gap, and also it helps us to know what people are doing what people are doing in the whole world in the same field which we are in. So that is the main thing why we are reading the research paper. So now let us see stage 1. We should get a feel of the paper. This is also known as skimming. So the technical term for this is skimming. Skimming means basically what you are doing is you are reading the title, you are reading the keyword, and you are reading the abstract of the paper. So you should see how long is the paper. That is also known as skimming. How long is the paper? Let me give you an example of the different types of paper and the length of the paper. Of course, these are approximate, length in terms of pages I'll give you. So if you are reading a conference paper, so generally if you see anything like a procedia or the name of the conference is mentioned, so a typical conference paper is around 4 to 8 pages, maximum 8 pages. There are a lot of limitations. Then if you are reading a journal research paper, it is around 6 to 15 pages, typically 6 to 15 pages. So we can see, in around 15 pages, considering the references, abstract, all things, diagrams, tables are there in 15 pages. So you can imagine it is very rich in terms of technical knowledge. So you need to have a lot of background information about these papers. Then if you are reading a review or survey papers, these papers are much longer. These are much longer than 15 pages. Some review papers I have seen, they have around 300 references. So one more thing, just a sideline, just a tangent from this. Normally when we start out doing something, we just tend to write a review paper. So what I want to tell you to journal people who have just started off in the research field, that publishing a review paper is much more difficult than publishing a normal experimental research paper. And generally when you write a review paper and then you submit to any journal, the people, they ask you, are you an expert in this field to review other people's work? So generally the review paper or the things which are done in a review paper, they are done by experts in that field. So if you want to start off, if you just a tangent, because normally I have seen a lot of students, they start off with review paper. So they don't know that publishing a review paper, a lot of things are there. It is very complicated. You cannot review 25-30 papers and then try to publish a paper. It becomes very difficult. Sometimes in conferences it is possible. Conference, they generally overlook a lot of these things. So conference paper. But if you want to publish in a good quality journal and then you try to publish a review paper, they will not accept it. So generally review papers are invited. That means the journal, they ask the authors or the experts in the field that please write a review paper for us. So you, unless you have spent 15-20 years in that field, you cannot review, because review means you are reviewing the entire people's work which is there. So unless you are an expert, you can't review. So just keep that in mind when you are writing review paper versus experimental or any research paper basically. So these are the three types of papers which are there. So you just skim over, you just look title, you just look at the keywords, then you look at the abstract, and then finally just see which type of papers you want to see, whether they are conference paper, journal research paper, or survey paper. Then let us go to the next thing. So where the paper is published. So even in stage 1, you need to see which is the journal. So nowadays there are so n number of journals, it becomes very difficult for us to even think which journal is right, which is wrong. But some journals, by name only you can understand that these are the best journal, and then you can easily take this paper for your review work. Even your guide or your supervisor will be very happy that you have studied these papers. Like science and nature, if you see these, you can blindly take these journals. So basically you only know in your field, of course this comes by experience, that whether or not this journal is good for us. So again, the publisher carries the lot of weightage. Like elsewhere, if it is publishing company like Wiley, all these are very very good publishing agencies. So once you see a paper is published in Wiley or elsewhere, such publishing company, by default you can assume that the quality of the paper is very good. So even that comes in skimming, and all this information is available on the first page. So it is not difficult for you to select or segregate a paper based on where it is published. So if you know in your area that such journal, you can just keep that in mind, that this journal is of good quality, and next time when I see a paper in this journal, I know that it is a good quality paper. Then look at the figures. Just have a feel of the figures, what the figures are trying to tell. Then read the section, the subheadings and headings. So there are always some sections, there are some headings and subheadings. You can go through these headings and you'll come to know basically what type of paper is it, whether you can go through or you can just skip this paper. Then you should note the publishing date. So many times I have so many students, they come up with papers and they review the paper which is 15 years old, 10 years old, 20 years old. So doing a review of a paper which is so old does not carry any weightage, because nowadays we know technology is changing so fast that it is going on changing in a year. So by 6 months a lot of things keep on changing. So a basic idea or a ballpark figure where we can see is you can review papers which are around 1 to 5 years old. So from now to 5 years old paper you can review and put them in your review of literature. So don't put any paper unless that paper is really important. So suppose in my field, like minimum quantity lubrication, I know that this field was developed 20 years ago. So I can put a paper which describes minimum quantity lubrication, or that was the first paper which describes it. So I can give a reference of that paper only once in my literature review, but I cannot keep on repeating that paper, or I cannot keep on repeating papers from that era which are experimental paper. Maybe one or two I can do, but I want, suppose 5 to 10% I can keep older papers, and the rest 90 to 95% of the papers, they should be very recent when we are doing any literature review or survey. So also we should just look at the publishing date. Okay, if it is very old, just leave it. That is known as skimming. It is very difficult to give a justification of any paper which is 20 years old and then you can say there is some gap in this paper. Of course there is some gap, but that gap might have been filled in this 20 years. So that becomes illogical to justify to any superior or supervisor or guide. Then you should note any terms or parts that you don't understand. So in any paper you cannot understand any paper outright. It is a very difficult thing. So some things if you don't understand, you can note it down. Then finally you can go back and look at Google, or you can search some papers on that, and so on and so forth. Doing a literature review and reading a paper is a very hectic task. So but once you are good with that, once you have found out your gap, then it becomes very easier for you to justify that you have done sufficient literature review, you have read sufficient papers, and then based on that you have these findings, and then these are the objectives which you want to carry forward. So a scientific research paper is a very peculiar piece of writing. Now let me explain you what is that. It is highly structured, as I said, 6 to 15 pages, 8 pages, 10 pages, every information is cramped in, and it is highly structured. Title, abstract comes one after the other. So mostly it has a predictable heading. Then every item in the paper exists for a reason. It is not there for any cosmetic reason. That means it is not there for just showing off that we have these findings, because each and every information which is there for some purpose, because it is a peer reviewed paper. So once we know that it is from a good journal, and then you go through the figures, you know that it is there for a reason and it carries lot of information. Then next is each part is connected to the other. Suppose paragraph 1 is connected to paragraph 2, sentence 1 is connected to sentence 2. Each and every section, it is connected to each other. Something new you can't find in between somewhere. Maybe it is there in the introduction, but something new, if something new is there in a paper, suddenly you see in the conclusion that something new is there, that means it is not a good paper. People have been hiding some information and suddenly they are revealing in the conclusion. So peer review process is not proper. So even when you read such papers, you will come to know that everything is connected. New jargons, new terms are not used suddenly anywhere in the paper. That means the quality of the paper is poor. Then the space is highly constrained, as I already told you, and researcher, they need some time before getting familiar. So if you have just started doing the literature review, if you have just started reading the research paper, you are really unfamiliar with the headings and all this information. So it becomes little bit hectic. But I hope after watching this video, maybe you have some idea about how to start reading a paper. And of course, it is skill, it is an art. You cannot master this art by just watching a video. You have to go through it. It is by practice that you can gain more and more confidence in reading the research paper. This video is just a help for you to know how to start. So once you know how to start, then you know what information I should find where, and then you become an expert as you go on reading and reading and reading. Structure of the research paper. Now let us see what is the structure of the research paper. How does it start? So this is the paper, the same paper which we have seen earlier. It is my paper, and let me see what I can explain you in terms of structure. So first of all, there is a title of the paper. So you need to read the title of the paper. Mostly it should not have any abbreviation. It should not have any, when you are publishing a paper, that is the point which I am telling you. It should be very easy to read, very easy to understand, so that any reader who is reading it, he should easily, or she should easily understand what is the main concept of the paper. So that is the title, highly structured. So first comes the title, then abstract. So abstract, based on journal, there is a limitation for abstract. Some journals say that it should not be more than 150 words. Some say that it should not be more than 300. Some says that it should be between 150 to 300. So each and every journal, they have their own limitation. They have their own point of telling, the abstract should not exceed such and such words. So you have this information that abstract has most of the information from introduction to conclusion in a very concise, in a summarized manner. So that is the abstract. Then you have the introduction. So what all things are there in introduction? Let me just give you a small brief about that. So in introduction, you have the background and the motivation. So if you want to find out about the background and the motivation of the paper, you should read the introduction. Then the contribution of the paper, the major contribution of the paper, just in few words, that is there in the introduction. Then related work. Related work means maybe this paper is a second step of the earlier paper which the authors have published. So even that is the thing, you need to see whether the related work is published in a good paper, what was the related work, whether there is a gap between the earlier work and this work. Okay, so that is also very important. You get that information in the introduction only. Then the problem definition. In the end of the introduction, as you reach the end of the introduction, they have to state the problem definition. If it is a good paper, the problem definition or the objective of the paper is there in the end of the introduction. That is one thing. If you want to find out what is the problem definition, what these guys are trying to solve, then you just directly jump on to the last line or last paragraph of the introduction. Then also they have they mention the solution approach or just an outline, what they are planning to do to solve the problem. Then the scopes and the assumptions. Generally people skip the assumption, but assumptions are very important. I remember when I was doing my masters, one of my external examiner, he just asked me just one question: what are the assumptions of your study? And I was blank. Most of the time we just feel that we know everything, but small things like these, we need to mention that assumption, because if someone wants to replicate that paper, they should know what are the assumptions. If you don't mention that, then maybe they have used the same parameters like you, but the results are different because some assumptions you have not mentioned, that these are the assumptions, these are the limitations. So all these things come in the introduction, and it is very important that even when you write a good research paper, all these aspects should be covered. And if you want to find while you are reading this paper, you need to refer the introduction, and all the information is there in the introduction. Okay, let us move on further. Now, experimental method. So after introduction, all this information you found in the introduction, then the next structure or the next thing which appears in the paper is the experimental method. So basically it tells you the details of the solution, what were the experiment, what were the parameters, what were the machines used. All this detail you will get in the experimental solution. Then all this information is there. After that you have results and discussion. So in results and discussion, they will mainly tell you what are the findings of the paper, what have they found out. So they have conducted these experiments, then of course they have found out some results, and the findings, it can be in terms of figures to tell more information, because just putting up data becomes very difficult to perceive the data, and then becomes very difficult for the reader also. But once they see a figure, they know what is the trend of the graph, what is the trend of the figure, and all that. So results and discussions are very important, and then a lot of images, figures and tables should be there in results and discussion to prove your point. Finally you want to evaluate, so all these things come in the discussion part. Then there is a section on conclusion. So experimental method, results and discussion, conclusion. So in conclusion, basically what is the takeaway from the paper, what is the entire thing they have found out, and so on and so forth. That all these things come in the conclusion part. Then you have references. So references, each and every journal, they have their own different style of referencing. So when you are submitting any manuscript to the journal, they have a template, or they give all the details, that what font they want, what references style they want, APA style or whatnot. All these styles are there, and then you just have to put up your references in these styles. That is the reference part. So all the papers which you have referred are there in the references. Also one more thing, you have to cite these references in the text. So once you have put up the references here, you need to cite them in the text. That is a different story altogether. We can discuss when we are talking about how to write a research paper. I am planning to make a video on how to write a research paper. Here we are only discussing how to read a paper. So once we know how to read, then we plan to write. Now let us go to stage 2. Now what is stage 2? We need to get the big picture. How to get the big picture? Let us see. So what are you looking for and where to find it? That is how I have tabulated this information. If you want to get certain information, you need to go and find it at that particular place. Now what is this? So if you want to find out about the research area or subtopic, you look into the title or the abstract. If you want to look about what is the problem that they are trying to solve, you need to look in the abstract and information. As I told you earlier, abstract and introduction, they have all this information of how they are trying to solve the problem in a jest. So if you want to get the big picture, remember we are talking about stage 1 and stage 2. You need to go to these sections. Just by reading the introduction, you come to know what are they solving, and if it is related to you, you take it or you leave it. That is what the main purpose is. So once you know the paper is solving such and such problem, then you know, okay, I should go further. This is a good information. So like that. Okay. Then what are the related work and gaps? So in the introduction only, they have to tell what is the gap. So they have to tell what is the gap they are bridging in this research work. So unless and until they do that, it is not a good quality work. Then what are the key contribution? They need to tell in the abstract and conclusion. So if you want to know what key contribution they have done, you need to go and see the conclusion or the abstract. Then if you want to find out what is the category of the paper, you get to know from the introduction or the heading. Sometimes if it is a review paper, in the heading only they will mention a review of, or something then a review. Like that they will mention. So you know the category of the paper. Again, if you know or want to find out whether the paper is published in a conference or a research journal, then again it is written Procedia, or the information of the conference is written on the top only. So again and again I am telling that only by reading and reading you will come to know about all these information. Then So we have passed stage 2. So if you reach stage 2 and you feel you want to read more, then you go to stage 3. Or if you want to get the information and you have got that information from stage 2, then you stop and then you leave the paper. But you want to read more, you want to get the detail now. If you want to get the detail, you need to go to stage 3. And what we will do in stage 3, let us see. Again, what are you looking for and where to find that particular information. So if you are looking for how the problem is solved and what are the defenses of the people. So people are trying to defend their work, right? You need to read the methodology, or you need to go to the figures or the tables. So once you look into this information, then you get to know more about the problem and how they are solving and what is their defense. So that will not waste your time. Then what is the research question? Again, I told you it is there in the introduction about the research question. Then the details of the solution and evidence, you should go to the results and discussion section. All the details of the solution, their proofs, their evidences, we did this and we got that, and this is the proof of that. So you can read the results and discussion section, you get all these details. Then finally the takeaway message, as I told you earlier, you have to go to the conclusion to see what is the takeaway message. Reading a paper critically. Now, why we want to read the paper critically and what is the importance of reading the paper critically? Let us see that. So, reading a research paper must be a critical process. So, why it should be a critical process? Let us see. You should not assume that the authors are always correct. Instead, you should be suspicious. So, you are like a critic. So, you are behaving like a critic. Whether the information which the authors have put in the paper, whether it is correct or whether they have put in false information. So, this is how you are reading the paper critically. Also, critical reading involves asking appropriate questions. So we need to ask certain questions to ourselves basically while we are reading the paper. Now, what are these questions? So you need to ask whether they are solving the right problem, because sometimes they are just people, it is already done, the problem is already taken care of, but still they are solving the same problem. Then why they are doing it? That is one issue that you can think about. Are there any simple solutions? Sometimes people make the solution very complicated to just show off that their research is very good, but you can just see whether that can be solved in a simpler manner. So that is how you read the paper critically. Then what are the limitations of the solution? Of course, the solutions, they have some limitations, so you need to find out. When you read the paper like a critic and critically, then only you can find out the gaps in the paper. Then only you can see, they have not done this and I can carry forward and do this. Of course, you are, you cannot come up with very new things suddenly. So the thing which we do is we just find out the gap and then see how we can contribute or bridge the gap. That is the most important thing which we do in research work. Of course, you can find out new things. You can, find out a very novel things. That is also a thing. But we do that once in a lifetime. So we cannot do that every time. So the thing which we find out is find out the gap and then how to bridge the gap with the solution which we give it. And we should find out the limitations of the paper which we are reading. Then next thing is that are there any assumptions, and are these assumptions reasonable? Whether they are doing it reasonably or they are just putting the assumption just like that. So you need to think about whether the logic is clear and justifiable, whether the logic which they are proposing, whether it is justifiable. This is how you read the paper critically. Did they gather the right data to prove their argument, and did they gather it in a correct manner? Okay, so they have gathered some data, they have trying to put up some argument, whether it is right point which they are trying to prove and whether the information they have collected is in a correct manner. Because sometimes people they just try to put in any information which is not even right also, just for the sake of putting it up. So we don't want to do that. People fall into the trap. Even good people, good researchers, they just try to put in lot of information. Maybe it is related to the paper or not, but that should not be the case. So that is how you read the paper critically. Did they interpret the data in a reasonable manner? Whether their interpretation is right and reasonable. Okay. And would other data be more compelling? So suppose even you are looking at the data, and whether other data will also be compelling, or this is the data which is appropriate based on their research. So now you need to think about all these issues when you are reading a research paper to get the details. You need to be like a critic, working like a critic, and then finding out all this information. Of course, this is for your good only. You are a critic, but the information which you are getting is for your purpose, because you want to write a paper or you want to find out the gaps in the paper. Then the next point is, we want to read the paper creatively. Now, how to read the paper in a creative manner? Let us see that. So reading creatively involves harder or more positive thinking. So critics are generally negative, that we try to catch people that you have not done this right, not done in this way, that way. But when you are reading it creatively, you find out what are the positive things in these papers, or what are the positive things that these guys are talking about. That is how you read the paper creatively. What are the good ideas in this paper? You need to talk about that, or you need to think about that. Something is good, of course, because it is published in such a good journals. It has a lot of citations, it has all this information. The researchers are there in the field for 15-20 years maybe, so of course there is some good idea in the paper. That is how we think positively and take the paper in a creative manner. Then, do these ideas have other application or extension that authors might not have thought of? This is where you want to think creatively. So this information is there in the paper, a lot of information is there, people have put in the information, but whether you can extend that particular research work, you can think whether these people, they have thought in that particular direction or no. Like that, you should be very creative and then find out a gap and then a solution to that, and then bring it as a researcher. Then the next thing is that can that solution be generalized? See, most of the research work, they are very specific. So you do a research work and it is very specific, very short range, in maybe related to you or your college, or that particular area or that particular field, very limited. But a good research work, a good paper, or a good researcher basically tries to find out a generalized solution. So the solution should work for someone who is doing this type of work, someone who is doing that type of work, someone who is there in India, someone who is there in the US. At least you should try to find out how you can generalize your solution more and more. Of course, there are some solutions which can't be generalized too much, but somewhat in some range it can be, of course, generalized, and that is the first thing which any external examiner asks you. Whether you have a generalized approach, not, then you can think about that. They'll just tell you that. So you should have a very generic solution to the problem which you are proposing. Only then your case is considered as the best case. Then the next thing is that, are there any possible improvement that you can make from these particular paper? Is there anything that you can change, or you can do a positive change or a improvement in this paper? You can think that in terms of creativity of the paper. If you are going to start doing research from this paper, what would be the next thing you want to do? That is how you think creatively. So someone might have stopped the research work at point A, and you want to go from that particular point. Then what is the next thing you want to do to go from point A to point B? That is how you think about reading the paper creatively. Then next thing is that after critical reading, after creative reading, the next thing is that you need to make notes while reading the paper. That someone takes a printout and reads the paper, someone just reads it in computer, in a laptop, or someone reads in the phone. But in all these aspects, maybe it is a printout or a soft copy, so we can say hard copy or a soft copy. So even if it is a soft copy, you can easily make notes nowadays. You can, if you are having a PDF, then you open the PDF and then you can edit the PDF and write all these notes there. So it all has, you can make notes anyhow. But I'll give a generic idea how to make notes while you are reading the paper, and how it is helpful to you when you come back to the paper. Because mind well, when you read that paper, for that time you know the paper, you remember things, but the moment you come back to the paper after a month or so, that you want to include that in your paperwork, in your literature review, then you forget everything. So how not to forget and how to recollect it easily, that is why we are making the notes. So the notes making is why we are doing that. Let me show you, and how to do that even I'll show you. So the first thing is that you need to cover the margins of the copies of the paper with notes. So it is a PDF. It is, so generally I prefer a printout version, so that it becomes very easy and there is a lot of white space around the paper, and then you take a pencil, you mark and you start writing, so that you know whether you want to take these things from the paper, you want to write it somewhere, or you want to use that in the literature review, or what important things you have summarized from that paper. You can cover the entire margin of the paper by just writing that. Then use whatever style you prefer. So someone might have a highlighter, they just highlight it. Someone, they use maybe notebook file, they just write down what things they have. So each and every person have their own style. My point of saying is that you should have a style of making notes, whatever it is. You write on the paper, you write on a book, you write on a journal, or you write on a PDF anywhere, or you directly write on a Word document. Depends on you, but you should have this habit of making notes while you are reading the paper, because when you come back to the paper after a while, you forget the entire thing. Then if you have questions or criticism, write them down. So sometimes we feel that these are my questions, but you go to the next page and you forget about it. So it is better to write it down so that you don't forget them. That is the one thing which we want to note here. Then underline the key points, what the author is trying to make. Underlining, highlighting, all these things are there. Make the data that is most important, that appears questionable, you can also underline that. Such efforts help the first time you read the paper. Of course it is helping you first time when you are reading the paper, but it pays lot of dividend when you read the paper after several months or weeks, because we are not computers, we tend to forget lot of things, and research paper is so much information is cramped in there. So when you read the paper next time, you feel like you are reading it for the first time. So rather than forgetting and not knowing what is the paper about, once you see the notes, at least you remember more than 50%, that these papers are talking about these things. So that is why making notes is very important while you are reading the paper. Okay, so these things were related to stage 3. Now you are moving further. So you are in stage 3, you read it critically, you know all this information about the paper and all these things are there. Then you are moving further, you want to evaluate the detail. Now again, in detail, what you want to see, what is the significance and the novelty in the paper, means what is the new thing they are trying to see or they are trying to propose. That is the thing which we want to see when we are evaluating the detail of the paper. And whether they have done sufficient literature survey. Some papers they don't do literature survey, maybe 5-10, then you know that these are novice, they are doing the literature survey. So like that you are trying to evaluate the detail. Then whether there is an alternate approach, whether they have explored this option, or they have some assumptions or claims which are valid. Sometimes the assumptions and claims are not valid only. So that is how you are evaluating the detail. Consistency and precision is also very important. You have to evaluate that. Sometimes the paper is telling something, somewhere it is telling something, contradicting information is there, information is not precise. All these things you are evaluating in the detail of the paper. So that is also very important. Okay, because you can use these references for finding out more information about that topic, or you can use this information and you can build upon that and you can present that these guys have not done in a consistent manner, in a precise manner, and that is what is the difference what I am doing, and so on. Of course this is not for doing your thesis or something. This is when you are writing a new paper. For thesis, lot of other information is also there which you want to put up in the thesis. So this is just in terms of writing a new research paper, and I am telling that you are discussing with the reviewer that what things the earlier paper have not done and what you are doing and what is the difference. Then is there a logical flow? So this is how you evaluate the detail, whether the flow is logical, whether they are talking in a logical manner or a random manner. That is how you evaluate the detail. Then, is it convincing you? Whether you are convinced with their argument. If not, then what things are there, what things can be improved, and so on. So this is how you evaluate the detail. So you have gone through stage 4. Now let us see what is stage 5 and what we need to do in stage 5. So in stage 5 you need to see whether there is an alternate approach to the paper which you are reading. Then next thing is that, is there any different way to substantiate the claim of the author? So the author might have claimed something, and then whether you can do that in a different way or not. So that is how you can substantiate the claim of the author in a different way, and whether you can do it or not, that is how you synthesize the paper. Then the next thing is that all assumptions are identified and validated or not. So sometimes there are a lot of assumptions which the paper talks about, but are these assumptions valid, and whether these assumptions have been identified properly or no. Then can the research results be improved in some way or the other? Can you improve the research result in some way, and new ideas and open problems have been suggested or not? You just need to find out, and that is how you synthesize the paper, by asking these questions. So this is stage 5. Stage 5 means you have entirely read the paper from the first page to the last page, and this is how you synthesize and ask creative questions. Then the next thing is that we will talk about some frequently asked questions. So many times the students, they ask us that I want to read the paper, but these are the questions in my mind. So how long does it take to read the paper, and what to do if we really don't understand the paper, and so on. So now we have I compiled that questions in frequently asked questions, so that even you have those questions in mind, you can easily see what we can do about it, and so on. So how should I read the paper? So that is the first thing. I know how to read the paper, but how should I start? How should I read the paper? So it depends on your purpose. So what is your purpose? What is your purpose? What do you find out from the paper? So that is how you need to approach the paper. So suppose you want to decide if this paper is a valid research paper, and whether it is relevant to your work, and whether it has some interesting points which you can take. So then what to do? You need to go to stage 2 to get the big picture. So unless you reach stage 2, it is very difficult for you to understand whether the work is relevant to your work or no. So only by going through the abstract and the heading, it is not sufficient. You have to take a different approach and go to stage 2 to find out whether that is that paper is relevant to your paper or not. Suppose you want to grasp the content of the paper, to summarize the paper. Now you want to summarize the entire paper, basically for your literature review or for your work. Then what to do? You need to go to stage 4. So you need to go to stage 4, at least to stage 4, to summarize and evaluate the paper, and then you can read that paper and then summarize it and use it for your purpose. So summarizing also, few points which we can talk about summarizing a paper. If you are using your paper for a literature review or writing a review paper, that 15-page paper you need to summarize in half page. So that is how you need to grasp the paper in such a way that you summarize the entire paper in half page, even less than half page. So that is how things are. Then you read the paper and you get it in such a way that you can easily summarize it. But to do that, you have to go to stage 4. That is the only thing. Then suppose you want to recreate the paper. Now most of the time in some prelim studies, what we do is we recreate some set of data which is already published in the literature. So if we do that, we get the results, and then we see whether that result is same to our result, and then we can build upon our research based on those results. So if you want to recreate the paper, then there is no option. You have to read the entire paper and you have to go to stage 5 to synthesize the entire paper. So that is the thing. You can't escape any point or anything in the paper. Unless and until you do that, you cannot recreate the paper. So again, depends on your purpose. If you want to recreate, you need to read the entire paper up to stage 4. How much time should I spend in reading a paper? Again, very common question. People say that, if I read it for 15 minutes, can I get the entire paper? So things like that people ask us, and then we have this solution or this answer to the frequently asked question. So how much time? Again, these times which we are suggesting, these times, approximate time. We can just say that this is based on our experience. Suppose you want to get the feel of the paper, you just want to skim the paper. New person, they might take around 5 minutes or so, but an expert, in a couple of minutes they are good with the paper. They know whether they want to take the paper or just leave the paper. If you want to get the big picture, beginner, they might take around 1 hour. Depends on if you're just starting reading the paper, you might take 1 hour, and an expert might do it in 10 minutes, maximum 15 minutes, and they get the big picture of the paper which they are reading. Suppose you want to get the details of the paper, you want to critically evaluate the paper. A beginner might take around couple of hours, an expert might take around 30 minutes. Then you want to read the paper entire paper. So some new people or some new researcher, they might take 6 hours. Sometimes they even take more than 6 hours. Sometimes they just read for some time, maybe few minutes, then they read it for the next day. So they keep on reading the paper for few days. But an experienced person, they know if they want to get the entire paper in their mind and summarize them, they have to sit at one place and read the paper for at least a couple of hours to 3 hours. Only then they can get the entire paper and they can synthesize the paper. So this is approximate time which you can just keep in mind when you try to read the paper. So it's not like you have just started reading the paper and then you say that 15 minutes you have spent reading the paper and you say that I'm not getting the paper, because in 15 minutes you will not get the paper. It takes time, and again I'm telling you that the more you read the paper, the more experienced you are, these time will automatically come down and you become an expert in reading the paper. Then next thing is, you have done all these things, you have watched all these videos how to read the paper, you have done the prerequisite, you have read the textbook about the paper, about the topic, and then you are good to start, but still you don't understand the paper. Now what to do? There are some things which we can at least tell you. What are the possible reasons for that? If you still don't understand the paper, the subject is new to you. That is one thing. The first thing which comes in mind, that if you really don't understand the paper, you are not familiar with the terms, you are not familiar with the acronyms, and you are a new reader of that topic. So again, as we have told you, you have to read the topics, you have to become familiar with the topic, and then you can easily understand the paper. Sometimes you may be mentally tired. So basically you have gone through lectures, you are sitting the entire day for your class lectures, and then you are coming home and trying to read the paper, or maybe you have had a very heavy lunch or a heavy dinner, and then you are trying to read the paper. Then again the paper is also heavy for you, so it becomes very difficult and mentally tiring for you to read the paper. That can be a possible reason which we can say that you are not able to understand the paper. Then sometimes the paper is only poorly written, so you can't do anything about that. You have taken the paper, you thought that it is a good paper, and then you have seen that it is in a good journal, or assume that it is in a good journal, but when you try to read the paper, you don't understand anything. The reason is the paper is poorly written. The authors, they have not written the paper in a proper manner, and that is why you are not able to understand the paper. So some things are not in your hand, so basically you just have to leave it and then come back later to read the paper. So these are some of the possible reasons that you don't understand the paper properly. What if I still don't understand the paper? So you have gone through all these things, but still you have come back to it later, you have tried to read it with a fresh mind, but still you are not able to understand what to do, or you do nothing. Again, when you are feeling tired, you just take some rest, you come back again next day, and then you try to reread the paper. Maybe this time, if you are mentally fit, you are mentally not tired, as if not fit but not tired, and you maybe have done few things in the morning, and then you start to read the paper, maybe you will be able to understand the paper. You can discuss with your colleagues, so sometimes that gives lot of help. Our colleague gives us lot of input. You can talk about the topic, you can talk about the paper, you can talk about small things about the paper. Maybe they'll give you some input which might guide you in such a way that you will be able to grasp what is there in the paper. Then one more same suggestion which I told you earlier, read some textbook or read some review paper on these particular topics. Maybe you will be able to understand the paper in a better manner. I hope you got good idea of how to read the paper, but again I am telling you that reading a paper is an art, and basically you can only master this art if you keep on reading the paper again and again, and then you become a skilled person in this, and hopefully you become an expert from a beginner. So thank you for watching the video. If you really like the video, give it a thumbs up. You can share the video with your colleagues if you like the video. If you want more update from me, from my videos about research methodology, you can subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much. All the best.